Joining me now is retired four-star General Jack Keane. Great to see you again. I'll get on to the ceasefire in a moment, General, and whether that'll hold, but I just wanted to get your impression. We haven't spoken since the weekend. What did you make of Operation Midnight Hammer at the weekend?
Yeah, I thought it was a remarkable success, and it's absolutely the right thing for the president to do. I mean, I know for a fact, because I did have discussions with him about this action, and from my own perspective, why it was essential to take it. And I know he called the prime minister and said, look, anything that you need to finish this off, we're prepared to help you. And they came back, with the 3 sites. They had done a lot of damage at Natanz, but they still needed more to do with the underground facility. Isfahan, the same way. And of course, Fordow, they really weren't able to do much damage, although they had operations planned to do that, and they weren't about to reveal what they were. But if the United States was not going to help them, they knew they had to do something. But if the United States, what they accomplished was just nothing short of a remarkable operation. The Israelis contributed significantly to it because they initially, in the first 24 hours, destroyed all remaining 70 air defense batteries. There hasn't been a shot fired from an air defense battery since the first 24 hours of the war, and we were not expecting them to fire at all at the 125 aircraft that would be in that area. Excuse me, not all of them would be there because they were refuelers, but they were stealth aircraft anyway, and they would have difficulty identification, IDing them and tracking them. Remarkable, stunning operation and revealing the advanced technology that the United States certainly has.
Won't surprise you, but I mean, senior defence officials making the point that the US showed on the weekend that they could bomb any country in the world and those countries would not even know US forces were on their way.
Yeah, that's pretty much a fact. The history of superpower status, which the United States had as the world's leading military superpower, is always projection of combat power globally. We saw that with the Romans, we saw it with the Brits, and we actually saw it with the Germans during World War II, and the United States pretty much post-World War II. What makes the United States somewhat unique is not only can we project air power and sea power globally, but we can project land power globally on a very large scale, which is really quite remarkable. So yeah, it was. I think in addition to the obvious, in terms of shutting down their nuclear program, the degree of deterrence I think the United States has achieved was really critical, and was very important, I think, in executing this operation. By that I mean, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea have been taking advantage of the United States the last 4 years, believing that our leadership was weak and we were vulnerable, and they could take advantage of that opportunity that presented itself. It was not isolated that Ukraine, Steve, that Russia invaded Ukraine. It's not isolated that Iran operationalized all its proxies in the Middle East, and that China increased their aggression and not only was preparing for war, but was threatening war. All of that had taken place prior to President Trump coming in. And I think returning United States deterrence on a global scale was also one of the major byproducts of that operation.
Just on the broader question of the defence of Europe, General, you and I sat and watched in the last 24 hours Donald Trump go to NATO. He's basically said to the NATO leaders, righto, you're going to have to substantially ramp up your defence spending. He's hailed the president as a monumental win for America. People are talking about committing 5% of their GDP to spend on defence. That's up from around 3.5%. How big a win is that for Donald Trump?
Oh, yeah, it's really quite significant. I mean, when he went in there in 2017 for the first time, he was just proposing that everybody meet the 2% defense. And there's still some countries that haven't been able to get to that level. But the other factor here certainly is Putin. I mean, Putin's aggression obviously took place between Trump's first term and second term. And he also has united the Europeans and recognized that the social democracies that have existed in Europe ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union, their priorities were not defense. They were welfare entitlement programs and other domestic programs, literally at the expense of defense. And you name the country, and it's all come down very seriously. A country that you're close to certainly is Britain. And you get into the UK military, it's a mere shadow of its former self. And, you know, they would struggle to put a division on the field. They claim they can, but it would be a real challenge. And that's the state that we find ourselves in. And yet we've got this significant threat that Russia is posing, not only with wanting to take control of Ukraine, but expanding into Eastern Europe. And we know that that's not a disputable fact. I mean, this is Putin's ambitions, and he stated it time and time again. So credit the Europeans here for seeing the threat, understanding it. Certainly, Trump encouraging them and pushing them in that right direction is a factor, and he deserves some credit for all of that. But yes, I think the NATO meeting was really centered around defense spending. They had a 2+ hour session just on that alone, and every country leader got up and talked about what they were intending to do and why they were going to do it. And you know, President Trump talked about that and how proud he was of all of them during that session when they spoke about their sense of commitment, not only to their country, but to the alliance and to standing up against aggression. So yeah, significant progress for sure.
Sad to say, General, Australia's still stuck at under 3%, doesn't likely going to move above that, may get to 3, but certainly not 5. We need to really have a good, serious national discussion. I don't expect you to make policy on the run, but we need to have a very serious look at what we're doing ourselves, given our alliance with the United States and our proximity to China and this region.
No, I totally agree. You know, Steve, I think there's huge opportunities here to put together and begin stitching together a collective defense in the Indo-Pacific region. It'll never look like NATO, with has homogeneous countries all stitched together, on one continent with similar governments and similar histories. But nonetheless, I mean, the tyranny of distance is a factor in the Pacific, as we all know. But we have common objectives here, and protecting our citizens and protecting the values we have. And I think that alliance begins with Australia, with Japan, with the United States, South Korea, and also the Philippines. And start putting this together where we do have common objectives in terms of defense spending on what capabilities are essentially needed here. It's not just the money. What are you really spending it on? That is critical. And then also sharing exercises together, not these bilateral exercises that we do a lot of with the United States, but an exercise that's designed to deal with the aggressor in the region, and that's China. We stitch together aspects of the war plan and go out and practice these pieces, and we want China to see it. That helped us during the Cold War, Steve, when we stitched together a plan against the Soviet Union. They outgunned us like China does. They outmanned us. They had more tanks, they had more artillery, they had more of everything. But yet, we exercised right in front of them every 2 years, and we wanted them to see it. And what is deterrence when you get down to it? Is, do you have real capability? And are you willing to use it? And we were demonstrating to them, while we didn't have all the capability that they had, ours was enough to impose impact and cost on them if they came across that border. That is what we got to do with China and the Chinese Communist Party. And we have the wherewithal to do that. And I think we should move in that direction. And certainly what you're suggesting, I think is very much needed, is a national discussion on defense and how Australia contributes to the collective defense of the region against this aggressor, as we know, is preparing for war and not just threatening war, and giving themselves a time date of 2027 to make certain they can exercise a war plan. That's all real. And this isn't fiction. This isn't speculation. This is real threat.
Can I ask you a couple of quick things before we go? Ceasefire, how hard is that going to be to maintain, do you think?
I think the ceasefire will hold. You know, I do believe, and the president understands this. I did communicate to him that Iran, the current regime, has not changed. They're on their knees for sure, and they deserve to be there. We've taken away the thing that they prize the most, their nuclear enterprise. But they are still committed to acquire a nuclear weapon, and they will try to recover and rebuild it. And when that happens, and if the Israelis got to go in there and reattack because they have some evidence that they're doing something at a secret site with enriched uranium, they have got to have the green light to do that. They have done this so successfully with the ceasefire dealing with Hezbollah in Lebanon. They've attacked them hundreds of times because they began to come south, violating the ceasefire, and put increased missiles, launchers, and other military infrastructure in the south. And as soon as the Israelis saw it, they slammed them and hammered them with airstrikes. We got to be prepared to do that. I'm convinced the Israelis certainly want to do that, and the administration will certainly would support something like that. So if there is a violation, Steve, it could be for something like that for a very, very good reason. It remains to be seen.
Just finally, I'm putting you back in your old job. This operation unfolds, and then you get somebody within the US military or within intelligence leaking a report suggesting it might not have been as successful as what Donald Trump was saying. How peed off would you be about that?
Yeah, I mean, those things are so frustrating. So our audience understands. I mean, like the United States, everything we have is big, right? So we have 17 intelligence agencies. You know, that's another story. Do we really need to have all of that? But not all of them, but some of them were tasked to focus on this, develop reports, and then collect those reports together, synthesize them, analyze them, and then bring that report to the National Command Authority, the President of the United States, the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, et cetera, in a briefing. This was the early stages, preliminary analysis of 24 hours of one agency. And they hadn't even rose to the top tier in the agency yet. And somebody who wants to undermine our government, undermine our president, leaked that report to the media, who CNN and also the New York Times, I think at times has the same interest that leaker had in terms of undermining the Trump administration. So for our audience to understand, it doesn't represent at all the collective thought of our intelligence agencies. And the CIA chief has said that based on the analysis, I'm certain they've rushed a lot of this faster than they wanted to because of this report. And they have said that the program has been set back, severely damaged and set back years. I went right to my Israelis who are very involved in this as soon as this was happening. And they told me unequivocally, General, the program, Fordo severely damaged, if not destroyed. They have people on the ground, Steve, who are doing the analysis, and they cautioned me that even that analysis is preliminary, but there's no doubt that program has suffered serious damage and it's years to recover from it. And they emphasize that we're still doing more work here. The human intelligence coming from Israelis are also feeding in to the American intelligence system. And I think by far, having people on the ground, this is likely Mossad and also Iranian resistance group people, and likely bringing some technologists with them, you know, to understand what they're looking at and how to get underneath the ground and make some assessments. Those reports are considerably more valid than the very preliminary report that was being made inside the Defense Intelligence Agency. And in fairness to that one intel agency, this was a preliminary report done at a very low level, who had not reached the leadership yet. And it just sadly, and this happens far too often in our government, somebody leaked that to undermine the administration. How shameful is that?
It is shameful. Always great to get your analysis, General Jack Keane. Thank you very much.
Yeah, wonderful talking to you, Steve, and your audience. Thank you.